Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc. My passion is about bringing to you, our viewers and listeners worldwide, on tips and techniques about how to understand the human mind when it comes to people in conflict. Today, we have an exciting guest who brings to us a little bit different twist on how to inspire, encourage, empower the people around us, oftentimes who are in conflict. His particular focus is around leadership. Not only leadership, but the power of spirituality in leadership. Mitch Gray of The Mitch Gray Show joins us today to share his insights gained over the years and how he sees the power of spirit, the power of spirituality, show up in our leadership capacity. After all, there are leaders at every leadership level, but not always are those persons installed in leadership levels equipped to really lead people powerfully and effectively, to really influence them to do the best that they can, and to therefore be happy in what they do, feel engaged, and of course feel empowered, and ultimately driving the bottom line for a richer, healthier, and financially profitable organization. So I can't wait to bring Mitch Gray to you. So don't go away. We're going to be starting shortly. Listen and learn, and pass on this entire episode series to your friends, to your followers, to your listeners, to the people that you work with and the leaders you know, because we provide insightful nuggets twice a month here at Decoding the Conflict Mindset. So subscribe now, right below. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc, and I'm so excited to have you join us today and to be here today with our very special guest, Mitch Gray. Welcome, Mitch.
Hi, Deborah. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, we've had a great segue into into our recording today, and so if you're wondering why we're smiling so much, we've been exchanging lots of good stories. So, but thank you again for being here, and I really encourage you to subscribe right now so that you keep alert to what's coming up next. And I'll let you know that Mitch Gray also has a podcast, The Mitch Gray Show, and that's how we met, actually. I was a guest on his podcast not too long ago. So Mitch, tell us real quickly how our listeners and viewers might subscribe to your show.
Yes, anywhere you listen to podcasts, we make it simple. And so just look up The Mitch Gray Show, that's Gray. Also our YouTube channel, Mitch Gray Media, and that's the best way to subscribe.
Wonderful, wonderful. Because we had an absolutely delightful time before, and that's why I asked him onto this show, Decoding the Conflict Mindset, because what we're going to talk about is a little different than usual, but certainly in the forefront of what's happening in our world as we continue to evolve from our few years of COVID and the pandemic. And part of that is all about how we show up at work, and how we're impacted in being at work, staying at work, and performing the work. So Mitch is going to take us on a journey to take a look at the power of spirituality in the workplace, because showing up with care and compassion is taking on a whole new look as we move forward in a very different kind of work world. The needs of our employees, the needs of ourselves, whatever our role might be, have vastly changed. So we're here to take a deeper dive in how we do that, right, Mitch?
That's right. That's right.
Well, Mitch, the more and more we talk, the more and more we realize that we sort of come from similar backgrounds and have lots of interests like podcasts and radio shows. But I want to share a little bit about your background so they have some idea of, the mindset that you're coming from as you promote and pursue the kind of work that you do, so that people can understand the implications and the impact and how they might use some of your teachings and learnings. And so Mitch comes from a very interesting background over a couple of decades as a former pastor, a life coach, certainly an entrepreneur, we can see that, community developer and creator, and really taking a look at developing a brand of leadership at its true deepest human level. And so I really embrace that, working with mindful leadership. And so not only is he, taking his passion to inspire and empower leaders, but he also teaches leaders how to recruit people and develop top talent, which is really, again, something very necessary in today's world. And we'll share a little bit later the books that he's written and the resources available to you. It's all about empowering the culture. And I love that because, engaging people at work has really taken on new meaning. I can't just
Right.
talk enough about how much the world has changed and how we need to show up differently. And so again, welcome, Mitch. I'm so excited and honored to have you here.
Deborah, I want to say we left out another thing that we have in common, and that is shoes. And at some point in life, I may start a podcast just about shopping for really awesome shoes, because I have a feeling we could both do that every day, and it makes life fun, right? If we've learned anything the last couple of years, and we're going to get into some deeper subjects as we go along, but I really think one thing that we learned over the last couple of years is that many of us were taking life far too seriously. And I always say what really ignites the change in humanity is either travesty or tragedy. And many of us experienced both. And unfortunately, we have other brothers and sisters in the world that are still experiencing it through other things happening in the world. But shopping is fun. And so the first thing I would say to your listeners, just enjoy life. Do the things that make you feel really, really on top of life, because it matters. So there's my pitch in the beginning. So here we go.
Well, that's great, Mitch. I really appreciate that. Sort of like, I like how you said travesty or tragedy. And one of my sayings is, out of adversity comes opportunity. Out of moments of pain comes the opportunity for gain. And so it really is, what have I learned from this? What can I do? And I so appreciate and have embraced doing the things I really enjoy doing and letting go of the rest. I just, in fact, took the weekend when I was isolating from my own little bout of COVID to purge my apartment and got rid of a lot of stuff that I haven't used this stuff in ages. And I felt so cleansing.
Right. That's exactly right. And it really is, that's also very symbolic for just taking inventory of life. And, I love all of your content on mindset. And of course, your listeners are listening to your show because they love your content. And really, it's about removing the noise. It's about removing the things that are distracting us. And might I add, there might every once in a while be a person in your life that you may need to deal less with because of negative energy, et cetera. But that's, really, that's kind of been the reflection I've had over the last 2 or 3 years, is when we can eradicate as much of the noise as possible, then we can fully step into our authentic self. And that principle applies to business, it applies to leadership, it applies to just living life in general. And far too often, a lot of the leaders I work with, they want to be the ones putting out the fires all the time. And that's one message I try and get as often as possible, is get rid of as much of the noise as possible. Cleanse your apartment as much as possible, because it does leave way for all of the goodness and all of the well-being that is meant for us. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is powerful. And sort of like what you say, I like the relationship to noise. But I like to borrow Dr. Phil and say, how's that working for you?
Right.
If it's not, get rid of it. Stop.
Yes, exactly right.
Figure out another way. Yeah. Because how we show up does matter. And that's really, sort of the focus of my messaging, is that when we can make choices. And by understanding a little bit about our neuroscience and going into care and compassion, which I know are key to your message, we really can then make more conscious choices and literally redirect how we're showing up in our brain. And so, when you talk about your application of empathy, compassion, empowerment to leadership, say more about that. What has driven you to take on this approach, and what lessons have you learned along the way?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It really began, and I love sharing this story, because there's this idea in life about the beginner's mind. I do believe that in our most fundamental, what I'm going to call DNA, kind of our spiritual, mindful being, everyone has a passion. Everyone really has an idea of what they enjoy doing. They may not know how that manifests into a career or whatever. And the beginner's mind idea is when you're a child and no one has told you how to live or not live life, you kind of naturally do the things that you enjoy doing. And that tells you a story about who you are. And for me, as a 10-year-old kid, all I wanted to do was be a pastor. And it was as clear as day. I grew up in a very religious culture. And so what I like to say is you can have a dream as a young person, but you can only interpret that dream through your current perspective. And so for me, the dream was inspiring people, empowering people. The interpretation of that, because of my very religious background, was, well, you have to be a pastor because that's the only career in the world that inspires and empowers people. According to that perspective, right? We know that not to be true, but according to, when you grow up in that perspective, it's very limited. And so as I set out in life to do exactly that, and I did, I also early in my adulthood, so early 20s, I was fortunate enough after schooling, after seminary, I went to seminary. After that, I went into high fashion retail for a little bit, and I needed to provide for my family. I needed a job. I was burned out. The seminary I went to was 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for almost 3 years. And so it was a lot. It was basically almost a master's degree in just a few years. So it's a lot. And so I just wanted to provide for my family. I had worked retail in high school. I was good at it. So I did it. And I fell in love with business. I fell completely in love with business. I stayed with that company for 5 years. In 6 months, I moved up to take on a multi-million-dollar location of theirs. And what I started beginning to learn, and it actually proposed a very moral dilemma for me. Because again, my perspective was to empower, inspire, and help people grow. You had to be in ministry. That was my perspective. And so all of a sudden I fell in love with business. I was starting to see that I could actually inspire, empower, and help people grow in business. And so I had this real moral dilemma that I wasn't doing what I was called to do, called in quotations, but I was doing what I was actually really enjoying. And so I left that business, went back into ministry, and then full circle came back into, this has been, almost 20 years ago now, back into business. And that's a journey that's really important to me because what I learned is leaders have such a position of influence and impact. So much so that I fully believe most leaders undervalue that influence that they actually have. And so over the years, over the last 10, 12 years, as I've really dug into what does it look like to show up in the marketplace with compassion and empathy? What does it look like to be a CEO or a blue collar manager, whatever your position is? What does it look like to actually show up with your full humanity as a leader? And the pastor side in me really liked pulling that thread because what I love most in life is helping people find fulfillment, helping people find, for lack of a better word, that enlightenment, helping people find their authenticity. And though I've left the religious world long ago, what I've learned is those basic human fundamentals and needs are actually really well useful in the workplace when a leader truly understands how to use those and walk those paths. So in backing that up even further, what I started beginning to realize is the reason most leaders have a fear and a trepidation of stepping into their full humanity as a leader, it's because they have an insecurity. Well, what if people see a weakness of mine? What if people see me fail? What if I make a decision that doesn't work? And so many leaders are functioning from that idea of insecurity because they've never done what I like to call the rule of reflection. And that's actually spending the time to look in the mirror, to look internally and step into that full authenticity. Because at the end of the day, Deborah, and you know this as well or better than anyone, we're all just human beings, skin wrapped on bones, floating around on this rock in this massive universe that no one can find to be into. And it's like, we take so much of this so seriously, but what we've learned is in a leadership position, whether you're a parent or a billion-dollar CEO and everything in between, when you can learn to lead from your place of humanity, you actually impact others for the better. You empower others to reach their full potential. And let's talk success. You actually breed more success in doing that than any other form of leadership. But it is about that authenticity. And so I know that's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but that's why that compassion and empathy means so much, because when we can learn to sit across the table from someone and show that we really care and connect at a level that is, as you said, at its deepest level, human, people will then show up for us. And although it's not an exchange of transactionary, it is a relational exchange. But in those relational exchanges, the result always becomes the transaction that's needed usually takes place. And that's what so many people forget.
Well, there's so many nuggets in what you just said, Mitch, that I'm going to sort of try to pick on 2 or maybe 3. I can remember them all, but one of the things that you said early on was, so many leaders feel that they have to be able to just fix it, take care of the problem and get it done. And that's one of the things I try to emphasize too, is that being the leader doesn't mean you always know the answers.
Right.
And if anything, a good leader is going to surround them with people who they trust and who are not afraid to give their input to their leader, so that there's a conversation, not a confrontation. And so that's, I think, a really powerful message. Too many leaders feel that they have to have all the answers, and that's just, we can't. We're just not humanly possible to do that. Yeah. The other thing I really heard that you say too is, I always like to say we all have a story.
That's right.
And oftentimes we look at our stories and go, what a horrible background or upbringing, but don't really look at how can I learn from this? And again, that's where I came up with out of adversity comes opportunity. Because I know my story, growing up in a large family of 9 kids and being on the younger end, I oftentimes say, we were taught to be seen and not heard. And I just talked about this in my Paris presentation, that I didn't know how to express my thoughts. I didn't know how to express my feelings. And then I said, heck, I didn't even know I had feelings,
Right.
And so it's all about learning. And again, how do you grow out of that? And just recognizing the lessons learned, good, bad, and indifferent. And so I really appreciate that. And this sort of takes me to my next question then, as sort of the third point from what you just said, is that I so can embrace that, when we show up with our full humanity. We know from statistical research that organizations who embrace this more empowered, compassionate leadership style, and also embrace diversity and inclusion and apply emotional intelligence are more profitable in so many ways, and so the, heavy hand and iron fist kind of rule is just like, we've got examples of that going on in the world right now. So, so I guess, what are some practical tips that you have for leaders and how to create that culture of permission and compassion and concern without looking soft or, being too mushy for their employees?
Interesting. Last night, I was actually invited to help facilitate a class at the University of New Mexico's School of Business, Anderson School of Business. And in that class, this similar topic came up. And one of the participants made a statement that I thought was really apropos and applies as well to what we're talking about. And he actually had asked a question. The question was, how do I continue to celebrate successes without seeming inauthentic, without seeming like it's just all I do is celebrate successes? And so without chasing that, we kind of talked about the difference in affirmation and celebration. You want to celebrate, but you celebrate like your kid's birthday. You don't have a birthday party every single day. You have a birthday party every year, but you make sure your child knows you're proud of them and love them every day. So you affirm people every day consistently. You celebrate majorly when it's time to celebrate. And then he said, what's interesting is I just went through a review and I learned I'm much harder on myself than my employees are.
Oh.
And I thought that was a really, and I think across the board, now there are the times that it is true, but I think across the board, for the most part, we are harder on ourselves than others are. I often jokingly say that the great poet John Mayer, the pop singer, he once wrote a line that said, "I am an architect of things that haven't happened yet." And that's what we do so often. We create these scenarios in our mind. And the reason I'm bringing that story up is I actually believe that's what leaders do. I think leaders often say, well, if I act a certain way, then my team is going to portray me in that certain way. When most of the time, that's not the scenario. That's not going to be the case. And I bring that up because the question you just posed is what a lot of people ask. Well, if I live with compassion and empathy as a leader, I'm going to be known as a soft person. When that, I've never met a compassionate, empathetic leader that people would say is soft. In fact, when you meet compassionate, empathetic leaders, people normally say they are some of the strongest leaders they know. It's just that they're not a prick. Let's just throw it out there. They're just not a jerk.
Yeah.
And there is a farce that leadership 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago that was heavy-handed, rule with an iron fist, don't let up, pull the reins tight. We've heard all the mantras and sayings. That didn't work. People think it worked. But when you go back and look at the people and think about careers in that day and age, people took a career in their early 20s and they stayed there for 40, 50 years. That was the norm. The problem is you go back and talk to some of those people that are now 70, 80, 90 years old, and they'll give you a story of a lot of regret. And that's the other end of the story that many people aren't listening to is, well, that person was a great leader. Yeah, but do you know how many people they turned and burned? Do you know how many people are 75, 80 years old, hate their retirement because of the memories that it brings up? That's the vast majority. And so at some point, the first thing we have to do is remove the myth that was actually good, firm leadership. No, that was terrible leadership that never works and never will work. So then we move to empathy and compassion. And the first actionable step that someone has to take, I'll refer back to what we talked about a few minutes ago. You have to do the internal work. You have to decide, A, what is my full authenticity as a leader? Not what difference do I want to make, not what I want other people to say or think about me. What is, if I'm alone in a room and it's just me on the earth, what reflection do I want to see in the mirror? That's step one, because until we can truly identify that authenticity and receive that authenticity, then we're just kind of playing a game and it's going to be very difficult. So that's step one. Step two is ask the people around you what type of leadership they need for their personality, with questions such as, how can I communicate best with you? How can I help affirm you in the best way possible? Does this person speak the language of clear-cut, straightforward, or does this person enjoy telling stories and having examples of what to do? Does this person learn by hands-on, or does this person learn by verbal communication, by actually me showing them first? And when you put in the work of actually listening, you said it best, Deborah, everyone has a story. And when you give your people the opportunity to tell their story, you're going to learn everything about your leadership style that you need to know, because the greatest leaders don't lead any two people the same. They show up the same, but they learn to speak languages differently. And the greatest thing I think an example I can give to people is view it as every single person on your team is from a different country, speaks a different language, and your role as a leader is to learn that language, learn their culture, learn how to relate to them the best way possible. Now, the rebuttal to this is, because you and I both heard it, Mitch, I don't have time for that. My rebuttal is simple and to the point. You don't have time not to. Because if you don't take those actionable steps of going internally first and really stepping into your authenticity and then learning through asking questions how to best relate to your people, nothing else matters. You're going to continuously turn and burn. People are going to continuously be frustrated, and you will never reach your full potential, nor your business's full potential. But could you imagine having a team of people that I like to call, if you can have a team of entrepreneurs, independent thinkers, people that take initiative, and you're speaking their language to get their full potential each day that they show up? Could you imagine that ecosystem? I mean, that's the ecosystem that you would have to be crazy to stop the growth of that situation. And so for the people saying, well, I don't have time to invest all of that into each person individually, again, you don't have time not to. So then the question becomes back to the internal situation. What type of a leader do you want to be? Do you want to be the leader that just simply shows up physically? Or do you want to be the leader that shows up physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? If that's the type of leader you desire to be, then those are two of the most important, I would say, the foundational steps. If you don't get past those two steps, nothing else is going to work.
A powerful, constructive steps to take. I mean, so much of what you say, I have just said, just so resonates with some of the work that I've done. And, and I love John Mayer's quote that you provided. I oftentimes say, I am the architect of our lives. We
That's
get
right.
to decide how we move forward. And again, one of my taglines is, how you show up matters. And so really it is about making conscious choices about, how do I want to show up? How do I want to influence and impact people influentially and positively so that they move forward in the way that I want to go? I teach also at Cal State University in San Marcos on a supervisory management program. And so we talk about cultural competency, but going well beyond race and ethnicity into these different communications that you referred to, and how people approach conflict and how to read the behavioral clues with all of that. And then two, one of the things that you said earlier is that how important it is for a leader, and yet many are afraid to do so, how important it is for a leader to ask their employees for feedback.
Right.
How am I doing? Am I meeting your needs? What do you need in terms of my leadership? How do I, connect with you? And too often it's like, well, I'm afraid of what they'll tell me, And,
right.
And wouldn't you rather know than not?
Well, it depends. If you're scared, then probably not. But Deborah, I'll take that a little bit further, and I would be as bold to say, if someone is in a leadership position, now I want to designate something here. There's a difference in leadership positions and leaders in leadership positions. And far too often we deal with systems and institutions that base leadership on tenure or availability. That's a whole nother episode we could get into about why to promote people. We won't today.
You'll be back. You'll be back.
But I do want to say, if someone finds themselves in a leadership position, and this recurring fear continues to come to the surface, I would be as bold enough to say that step one for them is to seek support to really find out if they're in the position they should be. And that has to do with that authenticity, because, and I get it, there's a lot of economic barriers that come to that. Someone gets a promotion, they're making $15,000, $20,000 a year more than they were, they get extra benefits. Well, it would be hard for them to all of a sudden take a step down. At the same time, what they have to realize is if that fear is continually coming to the surface, it's the same thing if you went to a psychologist and you were dealing with major anxiety. Not only would they potentially give you methods to use, maybe even medication to use, but one of those strategies would be don't go to things or be with people that make you anxious. That's the best way to get away from anxiety. So it's the same application. If you're in a leadership position and that fear continues to come to the surface, that's a story telling you something. You're either working for the wrong company, you're in the wrong culture, or you're in the wrong position. Be honest enough with yourself and have enough courage to measure that. And then say, yeah, this isn't right. This isn't working. This isn't going to be the best thing for me. Now, again, I say that knowing that that's not an easy thing to do. But what you have to realize is, and you alluded to it a second ago, you are making an impact. And so if you're the wrong person in the wrong position and you know it, you're negatively impacting those around you, not just your workers. If you have a family, you're negatively impacting your family. Friend circle, because you can't continually live every day in the wrong position and live a positive life. It just doesn't work. Our brain doesn't work that way. Our emotions don't work that way. And so be bold enough and courageous enough to take that inventory, because you're identifying something that does happen. And we both talk to leaders constantly. And I'm sure you're this way. I'll often get done with a 30-second conversation with a leader and go, wrong person, wrong position. Who's going to have the courage to tell them? And that happens often. And unfortunately, the employees of that organization are the innocent bystanders of damage in that scenario. And it's not a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, again, you raised a couple of things. So there's two things I'd like to mention. This stat has been around since 1998 by the Department of Labor. And what they found is that, why do good employees leave good organizations? Well, what they found is 60% of employees, whatever the reasons they tell publicly, actually leave their positions because of unresolved conflict, particularly with their immediate supervisor or chain of command. And so, because they're not feeling heard, they're not feeling, cared and supported, whatever that might be, they might be micromanaged or bullied. I see that a lot in my practice at every level as well. I mean, it could be the CEO being bullied by the board of directors, all the way up.
Right.
Yeah. And so, so recognizing that that's why I spend so much time on looking at communication and conflict management styles and how we show up with people differently. The other thing that, in fact, I just had 2 clients yesterday dealing with the same thing is that, well, I hate my job. I call my wife every day, just complaining. It's like, she's like, what am I going to do? And so I started asking questions. Well, why do you stay? Well, a lot of it was all those tangibles that you talked about before. It's hard to walk away from a high-paying salary and the benefits and blah, 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 blah. And if that's the case, then there are opportunities. Again, out of adversity comes opportunity. There are opportunities then to say, okay, well, what do I need to do to show up differently so that I have a more powerful impact, influential impact on those around, rather than leading this, and so my one client yesterday, so it was all those tangibles. And I said, well, what's your biggest issue then? It sounds like you like your work. It sounds like you like your coworkers. It sounds like you enjoy working with the customers you deal with. And he goes, it's the leadership. It's incredible, And I said, okay. So when you start complaining, then remind yourself of all those good things that you have. And what you could do is actually take steps to develop your leadership so that you have an opportunity to move up and have influence in making change moving forward. He's about 3 years short of vesting, and so he's got that commitment. They just found out they're pregnant, and so he's got good reason to stay there for a little while, So I gave him some tips about how he can expand his leadership potential and education, things like that. Give him something hopeful. And we got done, and he goes, "I really like how you think."
Well, that's exactly right, and there is a choice. There is always a choice, and again, it is hard. I actually have a personal development client right now that's in a very similar situation you just painted, and they're having to make some decisions as well. And it's, again, the story's the same over and over. It's the leadership. Conversely to the statistic, which I actually shared that statistic in my book, How to Hire and Keep Great People. And the other statistic is when you ask people why they stay at a job, the majority of the time it's because they have opportunity to grow or the leadership. And the top 3 or 4 reasons are always reflective of leadership, always leadership and culture. Those are the 2 either way. And so when we can help leaders open their mind to that, if I can hone my leadership skills from a perspective of compassion, empathy, and empowerment, and I allowed those 3 elements to be the pillars of my culture, then I'm going again to create an ecosystem that is incredibly successful, and there will be people beating down my door to come work for my team. And so this whole idea, because that's the other thing that we probably won't have time to get into today, is how many now hiring signs are you seeing? How many people are complaining, I can't find people? And the rebuttal is, wait, what? There are amazing people seeking opportunities right now. It's not the great resignation. It's the golden age of hiring, because people are taking their careers into their own hands. And so for anyone out there that's listening that is in a position of hiring, be the leader that empowers, has compassion, has empathy, and then let those 3 things be the pillars of your culture. And over the next 6 to 8 months to a year, you won't have an issue hiring. You'll be turning people away, which is a great problem to have.
Okay, well, Mitch, make note of what we just talked about, because we'll come back and we're gonna dive deeper into that, because I have so many stories and things to share as well. And I mean, just to give you a quick example, and then we'll move on. But over the last couple of years, well, notwithstanding 2020, but was working with a financial institution who had been doing great things for the organization and was really valued by the board of directors. And yet he could see he had problems, particularly with retention. They were constantly hiring and retraining and all this kind of stuff. And so they really wanted to work on the culture. And so throughout this last year, really took a look at their mission, values, and purpose, and how to make that come alive in terms of their daily practices. And one of the big things that we did is that sort of streamlined the interviewing process, because each manager was left to do their own interviewing, and then they were concerned why they weren't hiring the right people. Well, when are you trained? Are you trained on how to look for the right people? But we developed a series of statements that totally reflected, their mission, purpose, and value. Are you attracting the people who are committed to this kind of vision? Are you supporting them as they come on board towards that kind of vision? And so we went through a series of, selection processes as far as getting input from all the employees, from the management, and honed down a bunch of different values or people characteristics that they really valued and felt made sense for the organization, and came down to, I think it was a collection of 5 or 6, and that we centered questions around that. And then they developed a whole, sort of a, cultural initiative and program as far as including people. And we did a live training actually back in October, their all hands meeting, and it was a great success. Employees were really excited. The CEO changed how he engaged with people. Yeah. So I would love to have you come back and talk more about that. And so because it's all part of leadership. And again, it's
right.
Character, compassion, care, and concern.
Yeah, that's right. I love it.
So Mitch, sort of 2 things here, is that, one, if you could, summarize a key takeaway for our listeners and viewers around your message, around your work, your commitments, but then also say a little bit more about your books and how people can get a hold of you.
So thank you. First of all, I want to come back to, we started this with, we were going to talk about spirituality in the workplace. And I want to tell people, even though you may not have heard us use that word, first of all, I want to define spirituality for me. I love redefining words and kind of reclaiming them. By spirituality, and you'll see as you follow me in my content and book that I use that word quite often. I do not mean or equate it to religion. And that's kind of been thrown around, not very many people are talking about spirituality in the workplace because there is a little bit of a fear and trepidation there that, yes, it's kind of taboo. And everything we have just discussed is spirituality in the workplace, because spirituality simply means human beings living at their deepest level. It's emotion, it's mental, it's physical, it's appearing with your full authenticity. And so the example I like to use is, if you've ever experienced a great customer service and a human connection, you've experienced spirituality. If you've ever experienced a great employee who shows up every day and goes above and beyond, you've experienced spirituality in the workplace. And so what we're really talking about is, as a leader, how do we show up with our fullness, and how do we empower others to do the same? And that takes, people know, you can cut it with a knife when you feel that energy. And you can't describe it mentally. Mentally is kind of, in a way, the automated or robotic function of our mind. It just kind of happens and takes place. And we can rewire, neurons that wire together, fire together, wire together. You know all of that. You're an expert in that. It's not emotional, and people know that it's not emotional. And so that's why I've really taken this phrase of spirituality, because it's kind of the other element to define that human connection that is taking place. It's outside of almost any other word we use, especially in the marketplace. And so in the book, my latest book, How to Hire and Keep Great People, I actually opened the book with spirituality in the workplace and kind of going through what I just stated. Is that's what it looks like, what it feels like, and really relating it to the experiences. It's like when someone says, Deborah, you have to go to this store. Not only do they have the best stuff, but the experience was amazing. No one says, I think the experience was amazing. They just go, no, it was incredible. You have to go here. That's the attitude and the altitude of spirituality that we're really identifying. And so as leaders, we're just being called, and we carry the burden of, how do we really set that into our day-to-day function? How do we tie in that spirituality every day, no matter what the project is, no matter how challenging it is or how successful it is? How do we really make that a foundation of our culture? So in How to Hire and Keep Great People, I teach people about spirituality in the workplace. We talk about recruiting people, that align with your organization, that align with your mission, vision, values, where to find those people, and then how to develop those people to become great leaders. I believe no matter their position, no matter their pay scale, I believe everyone in your organization can and should be a leader. But that's going to come from top down. That's going to come from a cultural standpoint of we're here to develop people. Develop doesn't necessarily mean promote. It actually means that we're going to get the right people on the right seat in the bus. And then as a leader, you may not be the driver. You may actually be the one that's going around making sure people are comfortable, have everything they need, and are equipped to do the job. And so that is what we talk about when we talk about alignment. So that's the gist of how to hire and keep great people. Our curriculum is out now, so people can actually, in fact, I'll give your listeners, if they'll use code How to Hire Now, they can get 30% off of the curriculum right now. So we're excited about that. And then you mentioned the pod.
Let me just say again, How to Hire Now. Okay.
Yes, yes.
So that's a promo code to use so that they can get access to your material.
Yes, and if they'll go to recruitgreatpeople.com, they can find the link to the curriculum, or follow me on LinkedIn, Mitch Gray, Gray, and they'll find all the information there as well. So yeah.
Well, I think it's just awesome that you have taken, a phrase that a lot of people, go like this to, and yet have, really combined your rich background to put this all together in ways that make sense to people, and some wonderful materials to access. And with that, you will be back, believe me.
I love it. I love it. Hey, and I want to tell your listeners, Deborah, I think if I'm not mistaken, your interview for my show releases this week. And so they'll be seeing that come out. So they're going to hear all about us. Girl,
okay.
We're in this together.
The Mitch and Deborah show.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, there might be something to that. Who knows?
Hey, there might be, there might be. Yeah. Well, Mitch, this has been absolutely delightful. And to echo on the materials and resources you have available. And thank you for your wonderful offer of your promo code to our listeners. And we'll put that into our show notes so that people have access to that too. And I also want to let our viewers and listeners know that I also have a program called 3 Steps to Mindset Shift. And it takes a look at your emotional intelligence, your communication styles, your conflict management styles. And out of that then comes the opportunity to define and shape, how do I want to show up, and helping build some branding words around that, as far as, this is what I want to be known as. And this is how, and in my meeting that commitment to myself. And so it's a powerful exercise as far as, helping him grow that mindset that you're talking about, Mitch. And also, if I sort of recoin spirituality, it's really the spirit that we show up with, our energy, our enthusiasm, our attitude, our acknowledgement of others, and so on. So another way to think about it for those who might still struggle. Yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. Please, viewers and listeners, this is Decoding the Conflict Mindset, Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc. Please subscribe to the Mitch Gray Show, and also subscribe here so you're in tune with what's coming up next. We'll see you soon. Well, I hope you learned something new from Mitch Gray and the importance of bringing humanity, spirituality to the role of leadership in today's workplace, now needed more than ever. Our next guest coming up. So subscribe today, subscribe now, put it on your calendar. In 2 more weeks, Dr. Jack Getz. Jack is a phenomenal mediator, educator, lawyer, and a strong believer in ongoing adult education. In fact, he founded the first online law school, now run by Purdue University. Jack is going to talk about the current perception of the field of mediation and how it is actually not excelling to where it could be because we lack a professional certification. He talks about how certified financial planners have raised the position, the public perception of their field. Well, that's what we want to do with certification and mediation, how to enhance the public perception for using mediation as their first and final tool for dispute resolution. So again, mark your calendar, subscribe, get notified for our next podcast with Dr. Jack Getz. I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc.